All right, welcome back to Social Distillation, submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning on your brain. And hopefully today won't be too ranty, but I guarantee nothing because I'm a cranky old man. And we're going to start with news of the day that has made me extra agitated. Coming from a historical perspective, everybody knows the saying, history repeats itself. I can't remember who flippantly added to that, history repeats itself, because no one was paying attention the first time.
I heard one that I thought was better. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Yeah, I've heard that one too. I don't know if anyone knows who first came up with that one.
It was one of those writers, Mark Twain, I think. Was he?
It sounds like something he would say.
Yeah.
It sounds like a Mark Twainism.
Yeah.
So everyone should know where we're going here. And we're going to start in 1969.
Giggity.
Why? Because that was when Nixon came into office and started his gradual withdrawal of US forces from South Vietnam. And there was nothing strategic or military about this. It was purely political. So he started the withdrawal of South Vietnamese or from forces from South Vietnam, and supposedly, well, not supposedly, but started the Vietnamization program where they were going to increase their training of the ARVN, the Army of the Vietnamese Republic, or some, wait, ARVN, Republic of Vietnam. Anyway, brain old, tired. So training the South Vietnamese army to take over full operations and its own defense, and gradually drawing down the US forces there. And the reason we start there is because, again, history rhymes. That's what's happened in Afghanistan. There wasn't a real military or strategic reason. It was purely political to start the drawdown and train the local forces. All right, well, that sounds good, except it was done stupidly. And again, it was all political. Fast forward a little bit to 1972, and the North Vietnamese pulled out of the Paris Peace Conference. So Nixon said, okay, unleash the bombers. There's a really good YouTube channel, I think I mentioned before, called The Operations Room, for anyone who likes military history. He goes through and he puts up some really good graphics, basically going minute by minute of these particular military events. And he's got one on Operation Linebacker, which was the, no, wait, this is Rolling Thunder, whichever. The bombing campaign that Nixon initiated in 72 when the North Vietnamese pulled out of the peace talks in order to bring them back. Except, again, purely political. And I don't know if there was anyone in the upper military ranks that said, this is a terrible idea, and here's why. And he shows this, the operations room video on this shows this, because the B-52s were designed and trained purely for launching nuclear attacks. And they eventually became tactical bombers with heavy loads and cruise missile launchers, but that's what they were originally designed and trained for. So they executed their bombing runs against the North Vietnam in that manner, and they got shot to hell. And this was my rant when we were talking to Chuck, is the people who make these idiotic political decisions, they make them because they don't have to suffer the consequences. This was a purely political decision because no one who made the decision was going to have to suffer the consequences. It was the air crews of these B-52s that, because they hadn't been bombing the North had built up a ridiculous amount of AA and shot the bombers to pieces. Well, it did eventually work, though, and the North eventually signed a purely political and idiotic peace treaty that the South said, why are you doing this? There's no way they're going to abide by this. And the big sticker for the South was, the US agreed that the North didn't have to pull out its forces from the South. So there was a peace treaty, and yet the North still had troops and support for the Viet Cong in the South. Makes sense?
Yes.
See how it rhymes? So the rhyme here is that a lot of the talking heads and the Biden administration are trying to blame Trump for this because of the deal he struck to withdraw from Afghanistan. Well, that deal, yes, it did include the Taliban, who were supposed to behave in a certain way. It also, a lot of people don't understand, it also included the various factional tribal warlords, because there are a number of warlords, tribal leaders, who are kind of in the middle of the Afghani government and the Taliban, and kind of playing both sides to see where they can come out on top, because Afghanistan, especially the North, is purely tribal. I mean, it's downright medieval if you listen to anyone who's been in country talking about it. So same basic idea of the Paris Peace Conference, with the assurance to the local government, the South Vietnamese, the Afghanis, that don't worry, if they break this deal, we'll come in possibly with troops, but definitely with overwhelming air superiority. And this happened in the North. In the early phases, while they were making this deal, the Taliban attacked certain cities, overwhelming US air support came in, and the Afghani army was able to hold up. In Vietnam, it was what's called the Easter Offensive, because it was launched around Easter in 73, and it was pushed back because the South Vietnamese military had overwhelming military US air support helping them. Okay, well, fast forward to a new administration. Nixon has resigned. Congress has repealed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which, you know, good for them, they should have. So the new president, Ford, has to get support from Congress, has to get funding approval in order to help when the North Vietnamese invades the South in 1975. He doesn't get it, and the South just crumbles in a matter of months. Biden comes in, says, I don't care about that deal. We're just going to pull everyone out right now. And the Afghani government just immediately crumbles, even faster than Vietnam. And Afghanistan is even worse, because at least in Vietnam, we didn't leave massive amounts of equipment, of state-of-the-art equipment for the North to take over. The Taliban now has drones, Black Hawk helicopters, planes that we were supporting, because we just left them there. And the other way it's worse than Vietnam is that even without the major air support, at least the South still had some technical advisors and other US support to kind of sort of help them a little bit. Something a lot of people don't know is that a major part of the US presence in Afghanistan, and especially in training the military there, is contractors who were technical support to help maintain the high-tech stuff we were giving the Afghan army and to help train them in its use as well. Well, when we pulled all those people out of there as well, the Afghan army, that Biden was saying in a press conference before the complete disaster and collapse of the Afghan government, that they are the best trained and equipped army in the region. Well, yeah, except all of that equipment is useless because they don't have the technical and logistical support to maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
Rant.
Rant. I mean, realistically, there's not a whole lot I can add to that, other than I was in the crowd of people that were like, we need to be out of there. We need to be out of there. We need to be out of there. But there's a difference between leaving and having an exit strategy.
Yeah.
And we left a lot of people behind, and it's a kind of a clusterfuck over there.
Yeah.
I will add that I might be put on a list just for bringing up the website, but the conspiracy theorists are already all over this thing. Oh, hold on. It's a fake plane. This is all fake. It's just like the moon landing.
What?
And as far as I can tell, this is more of a right-wing fringe group which would not make sense because this can only hurt the left, but just leave it to these guys. The reality is there's lots of people there behind enemy lines.
Well, reality is I should be careful about how much of this I talk about, but I know someone who works for YouTube, and the past several days, they've been dealing with massive amounts of requests to pull down videos, because including the one that hit me the most emotionally is Sesame Street requested they take down a video because it had Afghan children in it. And they were afraid that these children would be singled out and punished by the Taliban, potentially killed by the Taliban for appearing in this Western video. So they had to take it down as quickly as they could so that these children would not be recognized and singled out for retribution.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we knew this was going to happen because it's happened before. It happened in South Vietnam. There were thousands of people who were killed after the North took over, and tens of thousands of people put in re-education camps.
Well, I saw the story today that they're actually hunting for specific reporters and killing family to try to get the information they need at the moment. So it's happening. All the crowd out there that is, if it's just one person or if we can save a life, well, guess what? We just killed a bunch of fucking people.
And that's where I wanted to go. I had all these stories about the idiotic way that the Afghan training and the mission there was being politicized and had been politicized over the past, since the Bush administration. It had been politicized. So that's my rant, really. There's plenty of blame to go around. You can blame in Vietnam, you can go all the way back to the Truman administration and show how there's plenty of blame to go around, and it keeps building and it's never taken care of, and nobody seems to care. And that's where my rant was going to end up, and why I decided I'm not going to use all these sources. People can go, we always say, do your own research, do your own study. And there's plenty of sources. We're
going to get to that when I go through COVID.
Exactly. But
we're going to talk about research in general.
The point I wanted to make is more philosophical, because I was listening to one of my annoying political podcasts. It's called The Editors. It's the editors of National Review magazine. And one of them, Charles W. Cook, made the point that ultimately we don't care. We, as in the American people, because ultimately, if we really cared about what happened in Afghanistan and the way it happened, we would do something about it. There would be large enough public support and pressure to force the idiots who are making these decisions to stop making terrible decisions, if we really cared enough. And sadly, I think he's right to condemn us, the American people, and say we don't care. Another point he brought up that I want to go into more detail on is there's a lot of lip service to the genocide that is happening in Western China with the Uyghur population. They're a Muslim minority population in Western China, and they've been put in concentration and re-education camps, and it has been dubbed a genocide by the United States, because textbook it is. Well, if we really cared about what was happening here, we would do something about it. But ultimately, the people we complain about, the high ups who are pulling strings, they don't really want to do anything about it because they make too much money with and from China. And we, the people, don't really want to do anything about it because we can get righteously indignant, but we also don't want the cheap crap we buy from China. We don't want our, Legos might go up a couple bucks a pack, and that's
well, not just that. People get caught between, again, we talked about resources, and I always bring up compassion as a resource.
Mhm.
If we did something about that, we have to commit troops and manpower and military power to do that, because they're not going to just let us do it.
Yeah, and even if we're not talking about a full scale war, there is risk involved. There is risk involved in moving more naval assets into the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait to keep China from threatening Taiwan, which they're already doing. The Chinese propaganda arm is already spinning the fall of Kabul big time, telling and directly telling Taiwan when, not if, but when we move to pull the wayward province of Taiwan back into the government, you'd better not resist, because you know the U.S. doesn't have your back.
Mhm.
And this is also something I remember Jordan Peterson talking about in several years back. It was when he was doing that tour with Dave Rubin, that speaking tour that they did together. And he was in Australia. And I can't even remember the question that sparked it, but he kind of shocked the audience. And even he was with an Australian politician when he was doing this talk, and kind of shocked them all because someone asked a question about government policy and this bad thing they were doing. And Peterson kind of stopped the girl that was asking the question. No, it's you, it's us. If we're going to live in democratic republics and claim government of the people, then we have to take responsibility. And we have to stop saying that all these things that governments do that we don't like is them, it's the government. No, it's us. Because if you really cared about these immoral and unethical things that governments are doing, then you would stand up more forcefully to stop it. So it's on you, it's on me, it's on us. And I think that is something that is definitely being lost in this discussion of the collapse of Afghanistan and pointing the finger of the blame game. Because again, you can go all the way back to the Bush administration. So let me briefly mention that one of the ways the Bush administration flubbed up Afghanistan is in 2003, or sometime around then, I think, is when it became a NATO operation. Well, that was purely political because of all the heat that the left was putting on the Bush administration, that he's a cowboy and he's going it alone. And they were trying to say, no, we've got this coalition. And to that extent, it wasn't a US-led operation in Afghanistan anymore with coalition partners. It was a NATO operation. Well, the problem with that is that then you get wrapped up in European politics. So you're trying to execute this mission, but you're being hamstrung by all these other European countries that have their own agendas. Not only that, I was listening to an interview with General Boykin, who is he's got a giant chest full of medals. He was a Delta Force commando and then commander. He was a special operations commander. And he mentioned, this is something I didn't know, that when NATO when a NATO coalition goes in to do a mission, they all have different rules of engagement, which is just mind-boggling to me, because each individual country will put its own restrictions on its own troops based on whatever their political agenda is. So on top of the political mess you already have because you've got a coalition, now you have to juggle the fact that each group of country soldiers all have their own rules of engagement. How the heck do you execute an operation that way? But it was done again purely politically to show I'm not a cowboy, we're not going alone, we've got international support while we're doing this.
I think one of the disconnects here is, we can go back to Bush. You brought up Bush, and of course, Afghanistan was a response to 9/11 to a large degree, probably it's at least the springboard that allowed it to be popular with the public, but it's the response that's probably the issue here. Did we go over there to retaliate, to make sure they don't do it again, or did we go over there to make another U.S. in Afghanistan?
Mhm.
And the nation build, I think, is where we went wrong. The westernized Afghanistan, because they never did. They never wanted to. In fact, we got a whole population. We're only thinking of the people who wanted it to be that way. Those are the ones that were trying to get on the plane.
Mhm.
We're only thinking of them, but the majority of the country wanted it back the way it was, with just a little less tyranny. And so the response was popular to go retaliate, but then we stayed. And then we tried to change a whole country by
Yeah.
force, realistically. And when the time came, they said, no, screw it, come on back in. We're more comfortable with you, Taliban. And just the minority that actually wanted to be westernized are the ones that are going to pay for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, going back to this is on us, is everyone was emotional, and there's not, we talk about being ruled by emotions and criticizing that and step back and think, but we are emotional beings. That is part of who and what we are. So there's nothing inherently wrong with being emotional. It's when you're ruled by your emotions. So we were rightfully outraged at 9/11 and rightfully wanted to punish those who perpetrated what was a crime against humanity.
It just
Okay,
could have been done a
fine.
little bit differently. We
But
could have
then
used military might without taking over.
don't let
And
your emotions rule you.
Mhm.
Okay. So all we seemed to care about at the time was payback and or justice. Great. Okay. But now take a second to breathe, step back and say, okay, well, now we've done that. Now we need to think. And now we need to decide as a people what we really want to do here, and what we think is the best way to go forward, and then pressure our leaders to do that. But instead, it instantly became political. And I put a lot of the blame on the left for turning it into a political issue almost immediately, because they were afraid of, Bush left office with popularity in like the high 30s or 40s, something like that. So really, really low. And people forget that after 9/11, I mean, it was in the 70s. Okay. He was very popular because of his leadership right after 9/11. And we went into, I mean, we were in, I think the Green Beret forces were in northern Afghanistan like within a week. And by October, Marines and Rangers were already seizing the airport and the areas around Kabul and whatnot. So very quickly we went in, and his popularity was through the roof. And the Democrats didn't like that because there were midterms coming up. Okay, well, they instantly made it political, but then the Republicans, the right, also went along with that to keep it a political fight, to instead of pulling back and saying, this isn't a political issue, stop making this a political issue. It was instantly politicized, and it instantly became a false dichotomy. And it's infuriating because things didn't used to be like that. Earlier, when I was thinking about what I was going to rant about, an analogy came to mind that when Truman fired MacArthur, it wasn't because MacArthur was a Republican and a potential presidential candidate and Truman was a Democrat. It was because MacArthur was being insubordinate. There's no other way to say it, and doing things he knew he shouldn't have been doing and saying. And it was a strategic and a military decision that Truman made as the civilian commander in chief. If that happened today, it would instantly be politicized. It would have been a political decision, and you'd have talking heads yelling at each other on cable news about, who was right and who was wrong. And that's not how things are supposed to work. And that's why, because these bigger national security issues, they aren't winner take all issues like in a vote, like in a political campaign. And when we make them that, we end up with the fall of Saigon. We end up with the not just the fall of Kabul, but then all the politicized junk that came up with it. One of my dozens of tabs that I was going to bring up that I didn't is I don't know if people know this, but remember how ISIS kind of took everyone by surprise and came out of nowhere? Well, there were reports that came out after the fact that that was because the head of CENTCOM, Central Command, which is in charge of the Middle East, the head of CENTCOM was doctoring the reports that were coming out of the Middle East to make the Obama administration look good, to say, look, peace in the Middle East, everything's fine. So when ISIS popped up and started putting up videos of horrible atrocities and taking huge swaths of territory, there were lots of people that were saying, what the heck happened here? Well, it was because it was a politicized issue. That guy is now the Secretary of Defense under Biden. How does this crap happen?
Well, this is a little bit of good old boy system. I guess I was going to bring up 2 points, but I'll bring up the second one first. For all of those, everybody in the audience, if we look at the things that are going on, is everything that's crumbling, all the things that are going wrong. Maybe this is what happens when you hire for equity versus ability. Maybe there's a little bit of that when we look at the failures of COVID, immigration, Afghanistan, across the board, of inflation. Maybe we should have hired for ability instead of having the most diverse cast in Hollywood. But on immigration, this is where I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy, because we talked about the minority that wanted to be westernized in Afghanistan. And they're the ones that are going to suffer, because they're the ones that are on the list. Like you talked about, the children they don't want to see them on YouTube. They're the ones that were helping us. They were the translators. They were the trainers. They were working for the bases. Mr. I'm going to let anybody in from our southern border, which I'm pretty much on, didn't at least have a plan that's okay. Anybody we're going to leave. And we know it's going to go back to a Sharia state. We know it. It may not be Taliban. Maybe he said there's no good way out. He knew the Taliban was going to come back in. He admitted that much. Mm-hmm. How about, hey, we're going to do this. You have this long to get out and we'll help you. Mm-hmm. What the hell was wrong with that?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, the people who are trying to put all the blame on the previous administration, we'll never know if the Trump deal would have worked or not, because the Biden administration threw that deal out. Mm-hmm. That was one of the ways they lost the countryside, is because all of those warlords, when Biden came in and threw out that deal, they said, hold on a second, we had a deal. And then they looked around and saw which way the wind was blowing, because that gave support to the Taliban, and the Taliban started moving again. So more and more of these tribal factions started allying with the Taliban again, because that's the way the wind was blowing. So this blame game is idiotic. But it again, it's not just all on the left, because there is stupid crap on the right too. Mm-hmm. That you made me think of, since that's part of my point here, is to gripe about the right, since that's where I'm at. One of the guys I listen to, I don't know why I do, but I occasionally listen to this guy called Michael Knowles. And he's a younger guy. He's one of these kind of new right guys. And he drives me crazy because of this idiotic, stupid crap he says. But I still listen to him because he's got a snarky sense of humor that makes me chuckle sometimes. And also because he is kind of one of these new right guys, and I kind of want to know what they're saying sometimes. And at least he makes me laugh even though I get annoyed. And that was one of his rants, was about the establishment, big government Republicans, because George W. Bush had come out with this statement about how we need to, the government has the ability, the executive has the ability to cut through red tape for refugees that are in an emergency status. And this idiot Knowles immediately made it a false dichotomy and a political issue by, oh, we can't be the world's police any more than we can be the world's refugee camp. We can't just let anyone in. Well, hold on. That's not what we're talking about here. You're making this a political immigration issue when it should be we have a moral obligation to the people that helped us and are now literally on a hit list. Okay. That's what we're talking about here. We can argue about other forms of refugee status and how much we can or should take in.
There's a huge difference between it sucks where I live.
Yes.
I want to come to your place and have welfare versus I was working for you. I'm going to die if I stay.
Exactly.
There's a huge difference.
And this is why everything sucks and why we can't have nice things. Because when everything becomes a us versus them, we've got to win the vote, black or white binary choice political issue, then we can't have rational discussions about these things.
Does that pivot us to COVID?
I think it does pivot us to COVID.
Yeah, it really does, because I think one of the major themes I wanted to express today, I mean, we'll go over some of the scientific data and the message that's being put out, but it's actually the language. It's how we're justifying treating each other based on this thing. And it kind of stems from, I have a longtime friend that is that we've trained together, we've worked together, we've passed clients back and forth, and had a lot of professional talks that were very innovative and outside of the box and intelligent. So a highly intelligent person, usually a very sensible person, but for some reason he's in the we're all going to die if you don't wear your mask and get vaccinated and walk around in a bubble suit kind of mindset. And he is kind of a type A personality. So if you get into that, you're going to be hardcore into it. And so we ended up having a long, it was an argument, but a long debate the other day, because he made a post online. And the post was, remember that polio that we don't have? Basically comparing today's vaccines to polio vaccine and how we live without polio because everybody did their due diligence and got it. And I saw his public post and I said, I'm going to respond to him in private, just respectfully. So I sent him a text and I said, that was first of all, a bad example, if you know the history of the polio vaccine. And the other one is it was very divisive and condescending, and it's just basically not very nice. It's definitely not going to convince anybody who was hesitant to come over and get the vaccine. It's just going to piss them off and probably make them double down. That was my point. But I got a 5-page response of why the vaccines are going to save the world instead of an actual response to what I actually said. And then we just went back and forth for a while. And, I started throwing points out there. So as we've talked about before, the protection from natural infection versus vaccinated infection versus the risk of taking the vaccine, weighing those options. And he kept, so someone who's been infected and had a bad response should get the vaccine. Yes. Well, they're 4 times more likely to have an adverse effect. And I would say that's even higher if they had a bad COVID experience. Should they still get a vaccine? Yes. So you're saying that someone should take a risk for almost no benefit, if any, because of vaccine? He said, yes. I said, well, there you go. We can't have a discussion. But it was the condescending nature. It was the us versus them that came up. And then the same person did the exact same thing with masks later. And I've got a couple of pictures that I didn't find the exact meme he used for this, but I found some that will do. So this is again one of those, got polio? Me neither. Thanks, science, and let's get the vaccine. This is the other one he used. You can make a mask. You can't make me wear a mask that violates my freedom, and then it compares it to drunk driving, because you can kill somebody else when you're drunk driving. So your choice to not wear a mask is equivalent to your choice of getting in a car drunk. Well, like you said, false dichotomies. This is a false dichotomy because you had a choice to get in the car knowing you were drunk.
You also had a choice before that to make sure you had
A
a
designated
designated
driver or an Uber,
while you were
yeah.
sober enough to make more rational choices.
But the key here is we're dealing with a disease that if you really break it down, to its bare bone, everything, it's almost a blameless disease, because the spread of the disease isn't when you're sick. The spread of the disease is when you don't know you have it. Now, obviously, someone who is sick with COVID-like symptoms and says, F you, everybody, I'm still going to go out and do my thing, that person's an asshole.
Yeah.
So you can compare that person to the drunk driver. But we're dealing with a disease that spread because you have a window where you're pre-symptomatic and you can spread it to everybody else before you know, damn it, I need to go get tested and stay home.
We knew that from the very beginning. That was the big fear, is how infectious it was because of the incubation time. And that was one of those things that very quickly went away and people stopped talking about and thinking about because it became so politicized so quickly. What happened to social distancing? What happened to all these other things to begin with? When did masks and then the vaccine and then vaccines and still the mask, when did that become the thing that everybody had to do? Back at the beginning, when we were having a little bit more of a rational discussion, I say a little bit more because there was a lot of stupid crap and stuff that we now know was being hidden. Where did all this stuff go?
Well, further into the conversation, well, I thought this was a person I could talk to like this, because we've had many talks in the past of diving into the research, and one of the reasons we work together is he appreciated my ability to do that, because he's in the field. He's a therapist and he deals with the people hands on. A lot of times when you're in the field, you don't have time to do a lot of the research. Now, I don't watch Netflix or anything like that, so I have plenty of time. And so I started bringing up the differences between, and we're still talking about the polio vaccine. The mask one was later. So to refresh the timeline for everybody. First of all, I went over the history of polio, which I have a screen for that here in a minute, how that's actually plays into the vaccine hesitant crowd, because it did not go well at first. In fact, it went very, very badly and took a long time to actually get right. And fast forward to now, we're dealing with an experimental drug, realistically, that's not approved and is being fast tracked through, which is never a good thing, even in a crisis situation.
Well, let me pause you for a second, because I don't know the history of polio.
Well, we'll go there first then.
The history of medicine and disease, that's not something I've looked into, but I will say that right off the bat, something that people should recognize with that first meme that's silly is, I don't know what they are, but I guarantee you there were potential adverse reactions to the polio vaccine. I just know that because everything has a downside. There are potential adverse reactions to anything, but the nature of polio is so much more debilitating and deadly that risk reward factor is vastly different. Different.
I will counter that point with, and again, this isn't an either or pro or anti-vax argument, is we have the luxury now to save fewer people and still be on the right path. Because back then people were dying in droves from all kinds of things. Polio being a major one. Now we have the luxury we have the comfort of, if we can save, in the case of COVID, if we could have saved 100,000 of the 600,000 lives, that's a big deal. And we have the technology and speed of information to be able to do something like that, which could lead to one of my other rants as we go forward. But the polio process started way back, 1800s. But when we talk about the actual vaccine side of it, we are going to skip forward to 1941. So we've got, oh, excuse me, 1935. We've got early vaccine trials. And these really didn't amount to a whole lot at the time. Of course, we're back in 1935. And then we have to skip all the way forward past Professor Salk.
Well, go back a second, because I think that is important. Click on that again. Okay. Test proved a disaster. Several subjects died of polio and many were paralyzed, made ill, or suffered allergic reactions to the vaccine.
Well, and if you realistically think about the process, this is where we are in the process. Well, this would have been our trials when they went through the original trials. But again, we're 1935. So keep that.
So it's not irrational to say, wait a minute, I have concerns about the polio vaccine. I'm not sure if I want to take that.
Yeah. Okay. So that would have been during the trials, but we came out of that okay, because the trials did show in the interim some good effects, unlike the polio, which was bad even during the trials.
Yeah.
But then Salk comes in, adjusts a few things, and gives himself and his family the vaccine first, which shows he was confident in his abilities, which actually he's not a bad guy in all this, because he actually did create a good product per se in the beginning. But guess what? Pharma came in and all these companies were using his model to create the vaccine, and we get the Cutter incident, and we get a similar result to what was happening back in those first trials, where people were getting paralyzed from the vaccine, and they didn't even notice it at first. They thought they were just failures of the vaccine in that number of 20% that still could get sick. But then they realized, oh, the paralysis is starting in the arm. Whoops! It didn't start in the digestive system or the lower back like the regular disease through natural causes. And so we've got the aftermath of that, where just people were getting paralyzed and dying, and it was possibly attributed to how these big farm companies were handling the process versus the actual original vaccine. But then they suspended it. That's 1955. So again, 1935 to 1955 to even get a product out there that seemed right, and then it still went wrong. So then we fast forward, we're still not there. We're still not there until about the late 1960s. We phased out the original Salk process. And in 1985, we got everything we need, and we set a new goal. And it's 1985 forward that we go through the process of actually eradicating the disease, which didn't happen until I think 1997, 1994, eliminated in the Americas. So we've got a 1935 to 1985, 50-year process of getting it right, with lots of people dying and lots of people getting paralyzed from the vaccine itself, not just the disease.
Yeah. And it's important to note that if they had not been reporting on and discussing all of these issues, they would not have been able to perfect the vaccine. When you make things this binary choice of no, shut up and take the vaccine, well, hold on, we have to talk about these things and think about these things so we can make sure it's right.
Well, let's rewind to 1955 after the trials, which turned out to be okay with the original Salk formula. And so you're in 1955, and I'm gonna time travel my friend here who said, remember that polio thing that we don't have anymore and we don't have to deal with? Take your vaccine. So now you're a crier on the street corner. Remember that smallpox thing? Well, take your vaccine, because we don't have to deal with smallpox anymore. The false dichotomy, your justification for being the good guy on the hill, and anybody who listened to you that got paralyzed or died is at least partially attributed by your statements. If you were the one that convinced them to go over. So not that anybody convinces anybody on Facebook anymore, but if you were that person that convinced somebody to do it and they died, that's kind of on you.
Yeah.
And so thus is the disconnect with social media is he doesn't know who went out and got a vaccine based on what he said. And if they have long haul effects from it, he's disconnected from it. I made my statement. I virtue signaled. I felt good about myself. I projected my own neuroticism on everybody else.
And here, I mean, he's talking about polio, which is, I mean, I've seen those memes too, and we all know polio bad. We've all been vaccinated, but the side effects were significant enough that they suspended vaccination. Now, didn't when the I don't remember which vaccine it was after the incident where like I think it was about a half dozen people died from blood clots that were attributed to the vaccine. Didn't they temporarily suspend that vaccine? I don't remember which one it was.
Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca, one of those two, or both. I think AstraZeneca, that happened in Europe, and J&J was here. But now we look at the legality of it. We're in a situation where these vaccine companies and any health providers that supply the vaccines are immune from any responsibility. And that was done to encourage them to go through with it, which is stupid, because that's where capitalism works. Is these companies are going to make billions of dollars. Your risk reward. So I'm going to make billions of dollars. I'm going to throw my hat in that ring. I better make sure it's safe.
Yeah.
Whereas I gave you immunity, I'm going to throw my hat in that ring and I'm going to get out as fast as I can, because I'm going to beat the other companies.
You are encouraging risky speculators, something that people always complain about when it comes to things like the real estate market or the stock market. Okay, but by the government stepping in and interfering with the process, you are encouraging that risky speculation that we otherwise rant about and condemn. And we are now encouraging it.
What I do need to follow up on, and I had this thought last night, but I haven't had a whole lot of time since then, is companies that are forcing their employees to get vaccinated. If they have a liability, if their employee, in order to keep their job, gets vaccinated and has an adverse effect.
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think that the immunity would extend to a third party.
See, that might be the battleground. Because I mean, everybody's like, oh, just get a different job. Well, you can't. You can't just pick up and move. If you could do that, we wouldn't have inner cities. We wouldn't have kids living in the inner city, right? If you could just get up and better your situation at the drop of a hat, a shit ton of problems we have in this country wouldn't exist.
Well, and you shouldn't be forced to make the choice of sacrifice my job, get a new job, or let this company violate my civil rights. Because frankly, that's what's happening here. So that's where the I think the right has the more libertarian people have a place to stand, because generally speaking, more libertarian people would say, well, the company can do what it wants because it's a private company. Well, no, a private company can't violate your civil rights any more than the government can.
Okay, so I'm gonna say that in a different way, because it would be a different take on the same argument, that I think has, at least from my brain function, a little bit more credibility. They have the right to do whatever they want, but if you suffer because of that, they have a liability to do that.
That's true. Yeah.
So they have the right to make you get vaccinated, but if you end up with a long-term side effect, then you then they have the also the responsibility for enacting that right.
Well,
I have the right to punch you in the face, but I'm going to go to jail.
Yeah. Well, here's where it's different though. And here's where it's so infuriating, because again, we're talking binary choices here and we're shouting at each other. Hold on, wait a minute. What the hell happened to HIPAA? By law.
I could tell you exactly what happened to HIPAA.
Yeah. Well,
It doesn't apply when it's an emergency, a national emergency health situation,
is there an
EEOC.
exemption in the law?
Yeah.
Okay, so the HIPAA, the law that created,
Yeah. If it's determined a public health threat, then they can ask for your vaccine status. They can ask for your,
Okay.
your company can say, go get tested if you cough. And we want to see the results before you can come back.
Right,
So
because I was
it's
going to
via,
say they can require it all they want, but under HIPAA they can't.
because it has pandemic status and it's a public health threat, they are allowed. So that one I did get clarification on from a
Okay.
public health lawyer. So that's the bypass there.
Okay.
But again,
Okay.
forcing you to do something where you could have a negative, repercussion, sending you home to get tested and paying
Well,
you the whole time isn't going to negatively affect you overall.
This is what's so infuriating about the politicization of it all is that, okay, so there is a HIPAA exemption, which kind of makes sense. We can argue about that, but let's set that aside for now. So there is a HIPAA exemption. So then we need to decide, does this virus warrant that exemption?
Because we can't even have that discussion.
And we can't even have that discussion. We're not having that discussion. You're not allowed to have that discussion. That you're a terrible person if you even bring that up. Well, hold on a second. Here's something that's been driving me crazy for a while with all this shouting over COVID. Did you know that California repealed? I don't remember if they actually repealed it or there was a proposal. There was a law proposed, and I can't remember if it was passed or not, that would make it no longer a crime to knowingly infect someone with HIV.
Yeah.
Can't remember if I brought that up or not, but
you haven't, but yeah, I do know that got repealed.
okay, so that did get repealed.
Mhm.
So HIV, you can knowingly infect someone with HIV, and I can't violate your privacy for that. That's not illegal. But something that for most people, maybe am I allowed to say this? For most people, per the data, is a really bad flu. And that is the public health emergency that is going to make us suspend our civil rights.
Well, I want to go a slightly different direction than that, because that's kind of almost a never-ending debate, because we do have 600,000 people dead. Even if you take into account comorbidities and stuff, it did have something to do with it, or else we wouldn't have a difference in total deaths for the year. But we got to fast forward now, because I made the comment that the sick people aren't the ones spreading it, it's the pre-symptomatic people. Now we fast forward to now. The narrative is this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Hospitalizations and deaths is the unvaccinated. The people spreading the damn thing right now are the vaccinated, because you don't know you're sick. In a vaccinated individual, for the most part, I mean, there are some ending up in the hospital, but those numbers are
we've shown those
small.
Yeah, and we've shown those numbers.
Yeah, so there are some ending up in the hospital, but I'm speaking again. You said for most people, I'm going to say for the most part, that the vaccinated person is having a better outcome. This is something the White House has been saying, and they're actually correct about, but they're not making clear the implication of it. So it's manifesting in someone who is vaccinated or has had the disease, who has a higher immunity, both of those cases, as something similar to allergies. Maybe in severe cases, a sinus infection. Well, guess what? Everybody's got fucking allergies down here right now.
Yeah.
Tree pollen's through the roof. All the flowers are blooming. Everybody's coughing, sneezing, sniffling. So as a result of that, we've got tests through the roof in the South. There it is. So this is a map of tests. The darker the color, the darker blue, the more tests that are being done. Well, you see that all along here, except for California, I guess, doesn't want to report their data, but you see that all along this line. And who are the two big states right now? Three big states that are showing up.
Yeah.
Is Louisiana per capita, Texas, and Florida. Our tests are through the roof because you got a sneezy nose and CDC says it shows up as allergies. So if you're a responsible person, you're going to go get tested. I had what seemed to be a sinus infection about 3 weeks ago. I went and got tested. It was negative. And, but anytime after that, I was sniffly for about 3 weeks. Anytime in that span, I could have got Delta and I would have been like, oh, I just took a test. I'm good. And then still went out and did my thing and had my clients come in. And even wearing a mask, if you're in an enclosed room for 30 minutes or so, everybody's breathing the same air.
Yeah.
The kids in school are all in the same HVAC unit unless they put the UV and the antiviral filters in, which I don't know why they didn't use the extra COVID money to do that all across the board, across the nation, but instead they did equity training and everything. But
Yep.
Unless they did that, all these kids are breathing everybody's air for 8 hours in the day. It doesn't matter if you got a mask on. The mask doesn't count. In fact, if you take that mask and you wear it all day and you take it off and you go to a store and you put it back on, you start breathing those particles in again. So this has become a pandemic where the unvaccinated and the never had COVID are still getting sick and having the worst results, but the vaccinated and the previously infected are the ones spreading it, because they're basically the equivalent of pre-symptomatic COVID back in the early days. That's why we're seeing these huge spike in numbers. Well, Delta is helping because Delta is much more infectious. It's a 9 on the scale, on the infection scale, which is the equivalent of one person walks into a room, they can infect 9 people. So that's kind of how that number plays out. If you obviously there's give and take to that, how long are you in the room, et cetera. But
If I remember, the early reporting of COVID-19 was like 4.5, 5.
Yeah, it was like a 5. Yeah, it was like a 5. And the worst would be measles, which is like a 12. So we're getting up there. It's equivalent to chickenpox right now, which is, everybody knows if you've been a kid or had kids, that it's highly contagious.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've got an aerosol virus, which is way too small for a mask to stop at all. That's replicating faster in the system, so you're getting a higher viral load shooting out. And we're all inside because it's hot as hell down here, and we're all in the same HVAC units. So there's your numbers right there. That, and we're testing at a higher rate because everybody who's got a sniffle is going to get a test. And some of these companies are sending their employees to go get the tests.
Yeah, I love how the reporting now has gone back to they shifted to make the numbers look better for a while, but now it's gone back to tests, because for a while they shifted from tests to hospitalizations and deaths, and they were only reporting on that because those numbers looked better. But now that, again, the talking points, the narrative, the politicization has shifted, so now we're back to tests again, to scare people into doing whatever.
Yeah, well, as usual, I'm going to bring data to the drawing board here. Now, one of these was just recently on Rogan, so a lot of people have probably seen this. This is the one that was on Rogan, but imperfect vaccinations can enhance the transmission of highly virulent pathogens. So this is something that's been studied. This is not something that's new, because I want to draw attention to the date, July 2015. So this is something that is not a new concept. We've known about this. We should have been accounting for this. And some people were on, screaming on the Hill trying to get people to account for this before we rolled out vaccines. Whether it was the best idea or not, that's the problem. If we really take a step back, other than the powers that be that are using this to their advantage, and the assholes that we talked about earlier that are obviously sick and still going out, other than those people, this is a blameless disease, because the right path forward isn't clear in any way, shape, or form. Whether maybe vaccines were the right decision, because those that have it are having better results. So maybe we save millions of people, but they're also transmitting the disease. So maybe we killed millions of people. Maybe it would have been a wash either way. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. Are we driving variants, which is the next one? We might be driving variants with, again, 2015. This is not COVID related. This is all airborne pathogens and vaccinations. So are we driving variants to be younger? Well, if we're doing that, then, all us parents have a reason to be mad at the vaccination crowd.
Yeah.
Was this a situation where it kills old people? If it runs its course, that's all it's going to do. Or was it going to already was it already through the natural process going to drive variants down to a younger population? We don't know. This can happen that I have up on the screen. It can happen. But also we got Delta from India, which was hardly vaccinated at all. So
well, and the data coming from India annoys me, and people pointing that annoys me.
All data from India in every realm, whether it's education or COVID or anything, is all skewed because there are billions of people, and only the top 1% is accounted for any of the data. India
is modernizing, it's growing, it has had a booming economy for the last decade or two. But India's got a population of 1 billion people. The overwhelming majority are still third world. Okay, you can't take the data from India and then say and therefore United States. No, they're going to, when you're talking, especially when you're talking about health, they're going to have a worse baseline period because so much of the country is still third world.
Okay, we can go to education to kind of paint a picture here. Is when they're talking about, oh, the US is such and such in the world in education. Look at India. Only the top 1% in the social class in India go to school. And you've got a 1 billion person talent pool to choose from. Of course, the people that come over here and go to school here are going to be brilliant. You got the top 1% of 1 billion people. That's a lot of people to choose from.
Yeah. And I think it's telling when certain people and organizations are pushing the Indian data for a narrative and ignoring the data out of Britain, which is a first world country, which has, I can rant about the government healthcare system, but they've got a decent healthcare system and a decently healthy population. Those numbers are much more analogous to what could happen in the US with the Delta variant. And despite the early scares, it's not looking as disastrous as people were predicting.
Well, back to the original point, the treatment of each other. It was this perfectly rational, nice, helpful. He's helped me move a couple times. All these good qualities you could have in a person. And yet he's being a dick to everybody that doesn't fit the mask or the vaccine side of the aisle he's on. He has completely tribally distanced himself from everybody else because of this thing. When realistically, the answer to almost everything is we don't know. Who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? We don't know. Now we're learning a lot of things.
Let me give an illustration, getting back to the point of how we treat each other. Sam, should we institute a national speed limit on all roads of 30 miles per hour?
Not sure where you're going with this, but no, definitely not.
Okay, then why do you want people to die? Why are you a terrible person who wants people to die?
Well, I would counter that argument with the roads like in front of my house that are 20 miles an hour would cause more people to die if you went to 30 miles an hour because kids play on that road.
Yeah. The point is, consistently for years, one of the top causes of death in the United States is traffic accidents. Traffic fatalities account for, I don't remember if it's like consistently top 3 or top 5, but it's up there with heart disease and the other things.
Heart disease is always number one.
Yeah. And then a lot of that is obesity,
well, no, actually the number one cause of that is people get old. And the first thing to give out is the heart.
Shockingly, the leading cause of death is old
age. Yeah.
Anyway,
the number one comorbidity with all diseases, except for the few that attack children, is age.
So the point being, should we treat each other like jerks if you don't want a national speed limit of 30 miles per hour? Why not? because one of the leading causes of death, tens of thousands of people every year are killed in traffic fatalities, and tens of thousands more seriously injured. So why not? But per the numbers, we could save hundreds of thousands of lives. We could save millions. You push it out over a decade and we've saved millions of lives. So why not? So we should treat each other like jerks if you don't want, because obviously you hate people and you want people to die. Or maybe there are no solutions, only trade-offs. So per the stupid polio meme that, you could say, well, wait a minute, I've got a 30-minute commute to work already on the highway. You cut that to 30 miles per hour. I can't make it
70 minutes.
I can't make it to work. Well, move closer to work. Well, move somewhere with public transit. Well, and it's the exact same meme. Is he taking a dump behind you? Because that'd be
I'm making
hilarious
sure
if
he's
we got
not.
that on
That's-
video.
I have a new puppy for those in the audience. He comes back over here. I'll show him to the screen.
Oh, I saw him walk by. That's why I asked.
Oh, here we go. Everybody say hi to Hamilton. The kids named him. I call him Hambone. We found him on the road and he was starving. He was crawling across the road.
Oh,
And I thought he was a dog that got hit by a car and was barely alive crawling. But when I pulled over to pick him up, he was just skin and bones, barely able to walk.
malnourished.
So
Oh.
yeah, but now he's looking pretty good. He plays with the other dogs and he sleeps in the bed and he's living a new life. So he's still a little bit nibbly though. He's just biting my ankle. But, treating each other. Oh, and also that tribalism on the inability to have a discussion.
Mhm.
So when we were talking about masks, we still have yet to have the discussion of when is it a good idea to have a mask on? When is it not a good idea? When is it respectful? When is it over the top? And going back to the same person, just posted pictures with his wife on social media because they had a burger out and had a good time because their kids in school. And of course, they took the picture together without their masks on, but they wore the masks in all the inside pictures. But I was like, well, why didn't you wear a mask with your wife? What's my wife? Y'all both work separate jobs, right? And see different people all day. So you could get sick from your wife. Why don't you wear a mask with your wife? It's the same risk, but you've got the dissonance to flip a switch because that's family. That's my people. I can't get sick from my people.
Yeah. And I'm old enough to remember back in the early spring when this was first getting going, that it was the left who was saying you don't need a mask, and it was the right saying, hold on, wait a second, maybe you do, maybe you should. And there were actually people selling masks, pushing masks and selling masks of, well, maybe you should have a mask in certain situations. So here you go. And now it's completely flip-flopped. And not because of beta, really. I don't know if I brought this up. I think one of us has brought this up before, that there was a Duke University study that showed that if you don't have the right kind of mask, which most people don't, if you don't have the right kind of mask, just a face covering will actually increase the spread because of the size of the COVID particles. It will split your vapor as you exhale if you don't have the right kind of masks on, and make it more transmissible in that way.
I don't know about that, but we can go kind of a common sense route on just a few. Okay, when can it be effective? Passing somebody in a store for a brief second in a giant area, but you're going to share air for a brief second. So anything that kind of blocks is going to help a little bit. It reduces the viral load. Okay, cool. Reducing viral load, less chance of getting sick, because we're all breathing it in. If you pass somebody that has it, whether they got a mask on or not, it's how much did you breathe in?
Well, again, according to that Duke University study, which rather quickly disappeared, was my point, because we can't have discussion. So this Duke University study was against the new narrative of everybody needs to mask up, because it was saying, well, no, hold on. you shouldn't mask up if you don't have the proper kind of mask on, because you're actually going to make it worse.
Well, my counter to that would be if it spreads it, well, then if I'm here, I get less density than if I'm talking to you straight on, because it's spread it out.
Yeah.
But again, so possible good time to have on it. Passing somebody in the store, you got to sneeze or cough. Obviously, a cloth covering is going to prevent the projectile nature of that. When is it possibly a wash where it doesn't matter? Me and you sitting in this room for an hour working out. Well, eventually, mask or no mask, the viral load is going to build up in the air to a certain degree that it doesn't even matter. Yeah. Not only that, it's going to be depositing on the mask itself. So if you wear that same mask later, you could be re-experiencing the viral load. Or if you have some in your lungs, you're going to breathe it out and it's going to come back in. Well, now we're getting to the worst. So that where it doesn't matter, we're in a room for a long time together. Now, where can it make it worse? Well, I've already had some viral load and it's shedding, whether I show symptoms or I'm going to be symptomatic or not. Now I put the mask on in a situation where I don't need it. And now I'm rebreathing my own air. Yeah. Well, virus breathes out, virus breathes in. Virus doesn't want to stay in the host, because virus staying in the host and all its replicants staying in the host kills the host. That's why it gets you to cough. If the virus gets you to cough, you spread it to everybody else, and it has chances of its progeny being spread to everybody else. I'm going to let the dog out of the room real quick.
Okay.
Come on, Bo.
In the interim, I will say something that, what was my thought? Yes. So this isn't just a left issue. Again, I kind of ranted about how, flip flop and the left is the one now pushing the narrative of mass. There is some annoyance on the right, and I'll bring up another guy I sometimes listen to called Steve Deace. And he wrote a book called Fauci and Bargain, a pun on Fauci. I wasn't going to bring this up because I haven't dug into his data. So I'll just mention it as an illustration of how, the right isn't necessarily helping itself either, because he has been ranting for weeks that the vaccines are leaky, which is the technical term for what you brought up earlier about vaccines that actually make the virus worse because they're not, they don't lock it down. So they allow variants to get through and become stronger, and or are therapeutics and not actually vaccines. Well, you can have that discussion as is and if, but you can't speak with the vehemence and the certainty that he has been speaking, and certainly not if you're not going to cite your sources and show your data better than he has been.
Well, and to keep this kind of on the line with the conversation that I had with this person, one of the things was I did my research because I was, like I said, I felt comfortable. They say don't bring facts to an argument until it's invited. I felt comfortable doing that with this person because we've had so many discussions in the past where we brought up the scientific data. And one of the themes was I did my research. And how are you doing your research is what I want to ask everybody.
Yeah.
Because first of all, MIT comes out with a study that shows that most of the skeptics are actually more educated on the subject than the people who are going along with the narrative, going along with the vaccine narrative. And so this is actually a really well-written article by this, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name here, but it's based on a study I actually linked before in a previous one, the one that says we're getting two different narratives from the same data.
Yeah.
And one is more correct, but the other has a social justice. So it should be the one that we're paying attention to. Well, when you really break down what came out of these studies was that that vaccine hesitant, which is kind of cool because it's also lower income, they're actually more well-informed and literate about the data than the people who are just going along with it. So I was like, he kept throwing out CDC talking points saying he did his research. I'm like, you can't just listen to the CDC and call it you're doing your research.
Yeah.
Well, the end of this article, this last paragraph, allowances must be made for legitimate concerns of the citizens who, for their own reasons, don't want to get jabbed. But if indeed individuals are doing their own risk-benefit calculations, it would help enormously if the left would refrain from their sickening condescension towards those with serious legitimate questions.
Mm-hmm.
You have to account for the people who have legitimate questions. Now, when we talk about doing research, we talk about, I just did a little experiment. I use DuckDuckGo usually when I do my searches online,
Mm-hmm.
but let's go to Google. Israel had the great population data that showed vaccinated versus unvaccinated and reinfection rates. I finally got something on it in a Google search using Israel reinfection rate, and I used 7 times because that was the headline from the article I knew existed. 7 times the protection. So I tried to make it to where I would get the result I wanted. I'm on page 9.
Holy shnikes.
Before I got the first result that matched my search. And it's a forum. It's a forum entry. It's not even the article I was looking for. So if you're doing your research on Google and you're saying reinfection rates of natural versus vaccination, you get 9 pages of what amounts to Moderna and Pfizer ads. So if you're doing your research on Google, I recommend using a third-party source like DuckDuckGo, or even going straight to PubMed if you can understand those articles.
Well, this is something you mentioned when you talked about just research in general and how to look for good research, is that if you're doing not just a scientific study, but even if you're writing a history thesis or dissertation, you go looking for people who disagree with you, because you need to find out you need to find out if there are questions you haven't asked yourself, and then you need to see if you can answer those questions, or you need to pose those questions and say, this is where the further research is, because XYZ, I don't know, I didn't look at this. So you need to be open about that. Well, same if you're doing your own research. Okay, you say you've done your research. Did you find anyone who disagrees with you? Okay, if the first answer is no, then if the answer to that is no, then you haven't done your research. If the answer to that is yes, okay, well then how do you account for their data and arguments, and where is it wrong? Because you should be able to answer that question if you've done your research.
Well, not only that, or what are the things you're missing? One of the parts of the debate we were having was the long haul effects. He was afraid for his kid, the long haul effects. And he brought up chicken pox, because for those that have had chicken pox and who know the immunology behind chicken pox, is it does live in your nervous system after you've had it. That's why you can relapse into shingles as an adult or as an older adult. So it lives in your system the whole time. And if you go get tested for antibodies as an adult, if you had chickenpox as a child, you will show antibodies, even though antibodies usually don't last that long.
Yeah.
That's different than an airborne virus, because an airborne virus, once it's out of your system, it's out of your system. Whereas if it's living in your nervous system, it's still in your system. So your body's still producing those antibodies to keep it off. If it stopped doing that, then you would have shingles, because same with herpes. If you have a cold sore, lip infection, stress, everybody says, oh, stress causes me to have that flare up. Well, because stress reduces your immune response. So once that immune response drops, it comes out. So what we have now with long haul is was the fear that it was going to be something that lived in your nerves. And I think was it the last time we talked about the brain effects, or the time before?
I think it was last time.
Did I even release that one?
I don't know.
I may have to put 2 videos out in a row because I dropped the ball on that, I think. Because we talked about diet and health and Olympics, and then we did the second recording that I was supposed to release a few days later.
Oh, well.
Oh, well. Okay. So you might get 2 recordings in a row, but that turned out to not be the case. Well, the foremost research on this is this Dr. Bruce Patterson and his crew, which are all listed there instead of just saying et al. So you can get all their names. That's cool. But they found out that long haul effects are actually because of the S1 protein, which is made when your body experiences the spike protein. It's the antigen. And I'm not going to get it all correct because he did talk way above me, but it's expressing in our monocytes, which are immune cells that float in the plasma in your blood. And they're attaching to the cell walls in the bloodstream, blood vessels, and causing inflammation. So anywhere the blood goes, you can have a problem. That's why it's so random and so all over the place. And it's usually in conjunction with what symptoms you had with COVID, because that's damaged tissue already. So they figured this out. They're doing a lot of work. They've got treatments and everything, but you'll never hear about it. And do you want to know why? Can you take a stab at why you never hear about it?
No, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because this should be post having the disease or vaccine. So it shouldn't get in the way of a vaccination campaign, which is what stopped a lot of treatment methods.
Yeah.
So why aren't you hearing about it? Because they've been working with these guys. Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. Remember those guys?
Yep.
That was the HCQ arguments, the ivermectin arguments. But because they've actually brought their stuff and been posted on their website, you're never going to hear about all that good work on long haul because they're part of the bad guy group now.
And I think I brought this up, that when I was doing my thesis research, how I kept finding people referring to this particular source as discredited, and yet no one said why. So same thing with groups like those guys. Oh, well, you can't trust this guy. You can't trust this study because he's associated with these people who have been discredited. Why?
Yeah, never mind that all the research up until the papers were written there was no connection between the two. But then Frontline wanted to bring that out to the public, which is something good to do, I think. But no one's gonna go down that route because it's political suicide. And if you're a doctor, it's career suicide.
Yeah. Well, and we should be asking the question of, wait a minute, what's wrong with these guys? These guys are focusing on treatment. How come you guys are focusing all on prevention and vaccine?
That's where politics comes into it.
Exactly. If we're talking about a public health issue, shouldn't we be talking about both? Because what are you going to do with the people who inevitably, whether they're not everyone who gets sick is going to be those evil conspiracy theorist vaccine deniers. I mean, other people are going to get sick, plus all the other people before the vaccine who got sick. Why aren't we talking more about treatment as well as prevention and vaccine?
I'm just going to state a fact, and people can come up with their own conspiracy theorists revolving around the fact. An emergency authorization for a vaccine, which is what we had, instead of a 6 to 8 year process of developing and then going through testing and then being evaluated by the FDA, and that's a minimum 6 to 8 years to get that through. So we had the emergency use authorization for the vaccine, but that would not be possible if there's a viable treatment. You can't issue an emergency use authorization for a disease that has a viable treatment. So you can create whatever conspiracy theory you want to around that statement. But what we've seen is a poo-poo on everything that is treatment-based, especially if it's a repurposed drug that can't be profited off of. So
why don't most people get the flu vaccine? Well, because if I get the flu, I'm just going to take some NyQuil to treat the symptoms and suck it up.
Or a CPAP or whatever. It's just
Well, there's a one of my favorite television shows ever is probably surprising because I also hate it. Is The West Wing. But I love Aaron Sorkin's ability to write snappy dialogue. I always love shows with good snappy dialogue. I also like his directorial style. Um, and this was before, so the West Wing debuted in the late 90s when Clinton was president. And so it was before things became stupidly political. Everything was political, but it wasn't stupidly political. So they would actually give you a decent look at the other side's argument. Now, they would often, belittle it or show you how it's wrong, but they would at least give it to you and make a decent job of showing you that the other side had a rational case to make. And there was one in particular on this issue that always jumps out at me, and I've tried to find a clip of this, that they're having this kind of roundtable discussion in the White House between African leaders and big pharma representatives and some of the White House staff about giving more AIDS treatment drugs to Africa. And somebody makes the comment of, ranting about why won't big pharma give away more drugs for a drug that costs you 50 cents to make. And shockingly, one of the main characters makes the rebuttal that it doesn't cost them 50 cents to make. The second pill cost them 50 cents to make. The first pill cost them $300 million to make. That's your, and it's more now. It's much more now with inflation and rising costs and everything nowadays. But there's your 6 to 8 years. It's not just the time. It's not just you might come out on the other end not having a viable product, but you're going to have an upfront cost of hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion.
Well, in the case of the current one, though, a lot of that was subsidized by Operation Warp Speed in the government. So again, you're looking at risk and reward. The pharma companies in this situation took very, very, very little risk, whether it was monetary or liability.
Yeah,
almost none. The risk they took was the successes they had to be at top of the food chain when this came around.
Yeah,
to have the means to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But a lot of these companies have been studying SARS-CoV-1 for vaccination for 20 years. So it was just identify that marker that makes it different, and then apply all of that other science to it, which is actually a little bit heartening because there seems to be crossover immunity if someone had SARS-CoV-1 in the past to COVID-2. Same with why don't kids get COVID as much as the adults? Well, they're constant little colds, and cold is a coronavirus for the most part. So they have a crossover immunity. Plus they have just a shit ton of natural killer cells because they're kids and they're adapting. Their immune systems are still adapting. They don't have T cell, B cell memory. So as a small child human, you have this over robust natural killer cell environment to protect you as you get older and you develop that honed immunity to your environment. So you're better at surviving almost everything, which is kind of cool. But again, the other part of it is they're constantly sharing the cold. So they have this natural, robust crossover immunity. That's heartening too, because we're probably going to get some of that with the variants. But the Patterson research is really cool, not only because I have had long haul and I've been using just random case study experiments on myself to try to get up to, okay, so we know it's inflammation in the blood vessels because of these things. What are anti-inflammatory over-the-counter herbs I can take for blood? And I found one out of India, which is really hard to read the science because they still have Eastern terminology. And it's like, how does that translate to Western science? Because I'm not getting something. But what I gathered from it is one of the main effects is it reduces inflammation inside the blood vessels. I haven't had a headache in 3 weeks.
Nice.
So the fog is slowly going away, but that's probably because of long-term lack of nutrients in blood in certain areas. But we know the brain can heal, so that's a good thing. So I've been playing with some of that stuff, and I'm going to try different ones. I just started a 2-week off to see if it comes back. So I'm trying to do this as, even though it's an N of 1 and it's subjective to placebo effect because of my hopes and dreams, but at the same time, I'm trying to do it as scientific as possible. But that's great. But then you look at the follow-up, they're starting to use this same ideology of how to treat this. And they're like, wow, this could probably work for long-term long-haul Lyme disease. Maybe this actually will work with HIV positive patients. So it's actually having a carryover effect, a good positive effect, but we won't know about it because, well, maybe you'll start hearing about those because they're not political. No one's profiting off Lyme disease right now, which sucks. I had a client that had Lyme disease and it took a long time for that to kind of clear up. If it is even permanently cleared up right now, but.
Well, I think we're reaching the point where we've bludgeoned this deceased equine thoroughly. And so I would add as kind of my wrap up thought of this is what we've been ranting about of why we need to have these discussions, because you have both the patience and the ability to dig through this data and figure out what you can apply to yourself for your own benefit to treat any long-term problems from you having had COVID. But those of us who don't understand witchcraft or don't have the time or patience to dig through the studies, we have to rely on experts. And if experts who have one particular set of ideas and are presenting this data and saying this are being completely shut out of the public conversation, then we can't get that data. We cannot improve our health, which is what this is supposed to all be about, because the people pushing a particular line, not just the people on high who are profiting it, but your friend sharing the idiotic memes and pushing that public thought and narrative, they're drowning out this discussion. And without this rational, reasoned discussion, people are going to be left out in the cold and not be able to help themselves. And that's why stop treating each other like jerks when it comes to these kinds of issues. And this is a thought I had because we've talked so much about critical race theory. That is one of my thoughts and difficulties in having this discussion with people, because we've talked about people who are inculcated in this, what is essentially a cult. How do you reach them? Because we've all heard the saying, perception determines reality. Well, no, it doesn't. Your perception determines your reality.
Perception 2 + 2 translates reality.
2 + 2 still equals 4. There still is an objective reality. Whatever your perception of that is doesn't change that, but it does change it for you. Okay.
Yeah. And it's a spectrum again. So we all do have different perceptions of reality based on our experiences and our brain structure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when we get far enough disconnected from what is objective reality, we call that mental illness.
Yeah.
And so if my perception is so far off reality that it is a detriment to my life or the people around me, you are mentally ill and you need help. And the perception around this whole disease on either side of the aisle is quite a bit disconnected from reality. Yeah. Whether you're none of that stuff that the CDC says is correct and you shouldn't have to do anything and my rights, versus you're killing grandma. Well, neither of those are correct.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be kind of my mantra. If you're pro-mask or anti-mask, you're wrong.
Yeah.
If you're pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine, you're wrong. Because there's so much in between.
Yeah.
I think we'll end this. I'm thinking this is going to be the thumbnail for this episode. What do you think?
Yeah, that seems right.
About right.
Seems about right.
Nice. All right. Well, good conversation as always. And I'll see if I messed up on that other video.
And we will see you peeps next time.
Yep. Do we want to tease anything? Do we have anything? What are we going to talk
I got
about?
nothing.
We're gonna look at the news of the day.
Yeah, we'll figure out what's going on.
All right. There's probably plenty going on because as soon as Biden comes back from vacation, everything's going to be fixed, right?
Exactly.
All right.
Huzzah. We all have that to look forward to. So good night, folks.
All right. Good night.